Okay, so in the spirit of the new Star Wars movie, I'm not going to do anything like have a lightsaber or anything. That'd be cool, but I don't have that. So do y'all remember that old Volkswagen commercial with the Darth Vader kid? Y'all remember this? And he goes around the house in his little Darth Vader costume, and he's like trying to get things to move. And first he's trying to turn the washer on, and then he's trying to get his dog to move, and then a doll, and nothing's happening, right? And then he goes outside to his parents' new car, and he uses the Force. And of course the car magically starts. No doubt, because his parents have that keyless remote to let it start, and he's shocked, right? He's astounded. He has the Force. He's feeling pretty good. That's the story that came to mind when I read this Ezekiel story. Because I imagine that this is sort of how Ezekiel is feeling. God, be it through a dream, brought Ezekiel to a valley of dry bones. And God asks Ezekiel, can these bones live? And Ezekiel's response is I don't know. Only you know, God. To understand Ezekiel's desperation in this story, you have to know what's happening and what has happened with the Israelites. There's a desperation for hope. Ezekiel is preaching from Babylon, where he has been exiled after the first Babylonian invasion. It's now about 586 BC, and the Babylonians have invaded the country again. And they've exiled the best of the best to Babylon. And they have imported other people into the land. And this is how the Babylonians worked. It was their policy for occupation and suppression, to dilute the people and its culture, to discourage any sort of organized rebellion. So right now, that has happened again. This invasion has happened again. The temple is destroyed, and the Israelites are at an all-time low. Now the prophet Ezekiel is hearing murmuring from the Israelites about their bones being dried up, and all of their hope is lost. And they're wondering, has God cut them off? Can God even reach them all the way in this foreign land of Babylon? And so Ezekiel is told to share this story, this vision of dry bones. God asks Ezekiel, can these bones live? It's a ridiculous question, really. It's insane. It's a ridiculous request, a ridiculous thing to prophesy. But Ezekiel does it, without question, without doubt. What I find interesting is I wonder if this is even a question that we would ask ourselves. In the midst of despair and loss, in the midst of everything going wrong in our lives, is that even a question that we ask, that's in the forefront of our minds? Can these bones live? Usually in the midst of difficult times, we are just maybe filled with self-pity, asking, why? Why me? Why, God? Why this? This stinks. This is hard. But this is the question that God poses in the midst of this despair, in the midst of loss, in the midst of death. Can these bones live? God's question is one about restoring hope and to have hope. Now, I want to acknowledge that, and particularly this time of year, that the dead coming back to life doesn't usually happen. That there's real loss that happens in our lives. Some of us here have lost loved ones. And for many, the holidays can be rather difficult. This is not a story about raising the dead or about making everything that stinks go okay again. The question that is posed is the question that God wants us to ask ourselves. In the midst of loss and despair and destruction and everything going wrong, can we keep moving forward? Can we take one more step? Can we imagine? Can we prophesy? And God asked this question to Ezekiel, and the response is probably not too far from our own response. I don't know. And God says, we'll try. Prophesy to them and see what happens. And the bones begin to rattle, and muscle covers them. And it brings the bones together, and then skin over top of that. And there's a body. But it's not alive. It's not until God's Ruach, God's Spirit, God's breath enters into these bones that this breath is breathed into them. And God says, these bones are like Israel, and I will put my Spirit within you, and you shall live, and I will place you on your own soil, and you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken and will act. I love this story because it is the ultimate revival story. This restoration of life, this consciousness, this movement of vigor and strength. The good news of the story is this, that when the Spirit of God blows into your life, blows into your community, your church, you can live. What hope! But that doesn't mean that everything's going to go back to the way it was. This is not about pumping a little air back into the tires and then going on your way. You see, in the story, these bones are dry and they're disconnected. And everything has to be put back together. And it may be put back together a little bit differently. But God is showing up in new ways. This story is a story about transformation. That things will be connected and reconnected in new and amazing ways. This is not simply a resurrection story. This story is about resuscitation to life. We are in the midst of Advent, of our Advent story, and God is about to show up in a new way. God is going to take on bone and muscle and skin and spirit. And God is going to show up in a way that we have never imagined. As a little baby. What will you do when your bones are dry? When you are weary? When the glass is half empty? How will you respond? Let us remember that we are a people of the resurrection. So prophesy. Let it be so.